It all went down on the night I was the designated driver for my group of friends after a party. We were 4 in total: Michael, Eddie, Daniela, and me. Living out in the country meant that whenever we wanted to hit up bars or parties, it was always a long haul, way out across dark back roads, which is why it was a big deal when one of us had to stay sober enough to drive the whole way home. We were cruising down Route 513, this long, unlit stretch of highway that cut through nothing but forest, with the occasional lonely house flickering by in the dark. The road led back into town where most of the bars were, but this story isn't about the party we left. It's about what happened on the way back. Somewhere along the drive, Daniela started crying out that she had to pee, whining and half sobbing in that drunk, slurry way that makes everything sound urgent. I told her she'd have to hold it for a while longer, but honestly, the mention of it started getting to me too, the pressure building in my own bladder as the cold air outside fogged the windows slightly, pressing the night in around us.
Daniela's whining soon turned to screaming, her voice cracking as she begged to stop. Her drunken fit filling the cramped car until it was all I could hear over the low thrum of the tires and the faint vibration of the road under us. Finally, I gave in, deciding to pull over to the side of the road. Why not? It was dark, empty, nothing but cold forest pressing in from either side of the highway, the trees black silhouettes against a starless sky. Daniela got out first, stumbling into the night and disappearing into the tall crops that rustled softly in the breeze on one side of the road. I stepped out too, the cold air smacking against my face and making the hair on my arms prickle as I walked to the opposite side of the road, heading a bit deeper into the edge of the woods. I'm the type of person who can't stand the idea of someone watching me while I piss, so I needed the distance, the shadows swallowing me up for a few quiet moments.
I finished first, shaking off the cold, and headed back toward the car. The air felt heavier now, the night somehow darker, the trees along the roadside looming in a way I hadn't noticed before. Inside the car, Eddie and Michael were still in their own world, singing loudly and off-key to the roaring, rad music blasting from the radio, their voices mixing with the static hum of the speakers. I slipped back into the driver's seat, shutting the door and letting the low bass of the music rattle faintly under me. I just sat there in silence, my fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel, eyes flicking toward the woods where Daniela had disappeared, waiting for her to come stumbling back out of the darkness. Each second felt slower, the cold seeping into the car even with the door shut, the empty stretch of road outside pressing its silence up against the glass as I waited. My 2 drunk friends didn't seem to think there was anything strange about the fact that Daniela had now been gone for 5 whole minutes. The music still blared, their drunken voices still slurred over the lyrics, but for me, each passing second was pressing harder against my ribs.
Finally, I couldn't sit there anymore. I shoved open the car door, the cold air rushing in to slap my face, and stepped out to call her name, my voice cutting into the darkness that swallowed the road. But it was thin, shaky, barely carrying past the first row of crops that swayed softly under the night breeze. Michael, who was even drunker than I was comfortable with but had a much stronger voice, stepped out too. When he screamed her name, it ripped through the cold night, echoing across the empty road and into the dark fields. It was the kind of shout you couldn't ignore if you were anywhere nearby. But still, there was nothing. No response. No rustle of footsteps. No drunken giggle. Just silence. And the soft hiss of the breeze over the stalks. I didn't want to go in there. The crops looked endless in the dark, the stalks leaning in under the moonless sky, whispering as they rubbed together, shadows shifting in the faint glow of the distant headlights. But she was my friend, and I was the only one sober enough to realize that something about this felt wrong. I couldn't just leave her out there. I couldn't drive away. So I turned to Michael, my voice low but firm, telling him he was coming with me. I wasn't going in there alone, not with how the night felt like it was holding its breath. Eddie stayed slumped in the back seat of the car, his head pressed against the window, too far gone at this point to even know what was happening. I popped open the glove box and grabbed the small flashlight I kept there, flicking it on and watching the weak beam cut through the darkness, shaking slightly in my hand. Michael and I stepped into the crops, the stalks immediately closing around us, brushing against our arms and legs with a raspy, cold touch. The ground was uneven, soft in places, making the stalks sway with each step we took as we pushed forward in the only direction that made sense, straight ahead, away from the safety of the car.
Michael started calling out Daniela's name again, louder now, but there was laughter in his voice. Drunken giggles slipping between each shout like he couldn't take the situation seriously. I could almost understand why, in his condition, the thought of stumbling around in the dark looking for a missing friend might feel like some kind of adventure. But for me, each step felt heavier, the darkness thicker, the cold settling deeper in my chest. I just wanted to find her, make sure she was okay, and get the hell out of there. Over the sounds of our footsteps, the crops brushing aside with soft hisses and Michael's laughter echoing in the night, I heard something else. A rustle that didn't match the rhythm of our steps, something close, moving just out of the flashlight's narrow beam. I stopped dead, throwing my arm out across Michael's chest to hold him in place, the flashlight trembling in my grip as I lifted it slightly. The light caught on nothing but waving stalks and empty air, but the sound had been there, I was sure of it. Now all that filled the air was the breeze moving softly through the crops, the rustling like a low whisper all around us.
"What is it?" Michael's voice dropped to a harsh, slurred whisper, the humor draining from it as he glanced at me with wide eyes. I didn't take my eyes off the darkness ahead. I'd pressed my finger to my lips, the flashlight shaking just a little as I whispered back, "Shh." Michael called out Daniela's name again, his voice ringing out sharp and too loud in the heavy dark. I joined in, our voices overlapping, calling for her over and over, trying to drown out the creeping unease in the pit of my stomach. I kept telling myself it was just her, that she was probably drunk enough to think it would be funny to sneak up and scare us, to jump out screaming and laughing, making us all curse her before dragging her back to the car. But every time we called out, the footsteps we had been hearing would stop. Dead silence would drop around us, the night air tightening like it was pressing against my ears, the crops shifting softly in the breeze as if whispering to each other. Then, after a moment, we'd take a few more cautious steps forward, pushing deeper into the crops that swayed and brushed against our legs, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark in shaky swipes.
That's when we came to it, a narrow stretch, a clearing that cut through the crops like a slim corridor, only wide enough for maybe two people to walk side by side. I didn't know much about farming, didn't know why there would be a path like this here, but it looked like it was meant for people to walk through or for machines to roll through when the sun was up. I stopped, the flashlight hovering in front of me, breathing hard as I looked down the narrow stretch to my left, following it as far as the light would reach. The darkness swallowed everything past that, the stalks shifting gently, like dark fingers brushing against each other. I turned the light to the right, scanning the opposite end of the corridor, the crunch of Michael's shoes in the dirt behind me the only sound aside from the whispering crops. Then I heard it. 3 distinct footsteps, soft, deliberate, crushing the dirt quietly underfoot. The sound of stalks being pushed aside, a soft rustle as something moved them outward into the path. My breath caught in my throat as I lifted the flashlight, the beam shaking as it caught on a shape stepping into view from the shadows. At first, the light caught only on legs, the lower half of someone's body stepping into the corridor, the pale fabric of pants shifting as they moved forward. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of it, defaulting to the only thing that made sense in the dark, assuming it was Michael stepping in front of me. But Michael was behind me. And as the light crawled up, revealing more, I realized it wasn't Michael. It wasn't Daniela either.
Standing there, halfway in the beam of light, was a man I had never seen before in my life. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but what I could see was enough to freeze me in place. His features were blurry in the trembling light, but they were sharp enough to know he wasn't smiling. His eyes were too dark, his posture too still, like he was just waiting there, staring at us. There was nothing friendly about the way he stood there in that narrow clearing in the dead of night.
My body took over before my brain could, a jolt of cold panic shooting through me as I turned and bolted in the only direction I remembered, the way we had come. My feet pounded against the dirt path, crashing through the stalks that clawed at my clothes, ripping at my arms as I shoved them aside. I ran so fast, so hard that it felt like only 10 seconds passed before I burst out of the crops, the cold night air slamming against my face as the car's silhouette appeared in the darkness. I threw myself at the car, fumbling with the handle, my breath ragged, chest burning. Inside, Eddie was passed out across the back seat, his face pressed against the glass, the condensation from his breath fogging up a patch of the window. I didn't even try to get help from him, not with the way my hands were shaking, not with the way my mind was screaming to get back in the car, to lock the doors, to do something, anything before that man stepped out of the crops behind me.
I started laying on the horn, slamming it down over and over, the harsh blare tearing through the stillness of the night. I didn't care if I was waking up every house within a mile, didn't care if whoever that man was heard it too. I just needed Michael and hopefully Daniela to hear it and get the hell back to the car. The image of that man standing there in the crops wouldn't leave my head, the way he just watched us without moving, his shadowy face giving nothing away. I didn't know if he owned the land, if he was some random lunatic, or if we just stumbled into something we were never supposed to see. But the thought of him standing out there in the darkness made my skin crawl. I kept pressing the horn, each blast cutting through the night like a scream, until, finally, the stalks on the far side of the road started to shift and part. Michael emerged first, stumbling out of the crops, dragging Daniela with him. She wasn't walking, her head lolled against her shoulder, her arms limp at her sides as he struggled to hold her up.
My stomach dropped. She looked unconscious, her hair falling over her face as Michael half carried, half dragged her toward the car. I jumped out, the cold air biting at my skin as I ran over to help, grabbing Daniela's other arm as we lifted her together, her body heavy and unresponsive, the weight of her head rolling against my chest as we maneuvered her into the back seat. We got her settled, her head resting against the door, her face pale under the glow of the overhead light, when Michael climbed in after her. That's when Michael pointed it out, a gash on her forehead, just above her eyebrow, crusted with dark blood that had trickled down and dried against her skin. It looked deep, like it had been made by something heavy, something sharp, striking her hard enough to drop her where she stood. Seeing that wound seemed to knock the drunken haze out of Michael's eyes, replacing it with something cold and clear as the panic settled in. His breathing was ragged, but he looked at me, his voice low and steady in a way that made my heart pound harder. He told me we needed to get her to a hospital. Fast. The nearest one was 10 minutes away, but even that felt too far.
The drive there was chaos. Daniela was unconscious, the car reeking of sweat and fear. Michael yelling at me to drive faster, to keep going, to run the lights if I had to. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white, the headlights cutting through the empty roads as we flew through the darkness, the engine growling under us, the tires hissing across the asphalt as I pushed the car faster than I ever had before. When we got to the hospital, we burst through the doors, dragging Daniela in as quickly as we could, shouting for help. Nurses rushed over, taking her from us, guiding her onto a gurney as the automatic doors closed behind us, locking out the cold night air. It was only then, in the harsh glow of the hospital lights, that Michael finally said it. Not to me, but to the nurses as they wheeled Daniela away. His voice was low, shaking slightly, but every word was clear. He told them that he had seen some man, some stranger, dragging Daniela's limp, unconscious body through the crops before he noticed Michael standing there. And when that man saw him, he dropped her and fled, disappearing deeper into the darkness of the field.
Michael hadn't said a word of this in the car, hadn't told me as we drove,
But hearing it now made everything fall into place. The man in the crops. The way Daniela hadn't come back when we called. The gash on her forehead. That man had done this to her. Later, when the nurses came out to let us know Daniela was awake, her forehead stitched up, she looked at us with empty eyes, blinking slowly like she was trying to remember where she was. She had no memory of what had happened. Nothing from the moment we stepped into the party to the moment she got struck in the head. It was all gone, wiped clean, leaving nothing but that wound and the fear that now sat heavy in all of us, even as we left the hospital under the cold glow of dawn. "12:17. That green glow from the clock on my car's dashboard is burned into my memory, shining brighter than it should have in the darkness. I remember that exact number, clear as day, as I was driving home after another long night shift at the pharmacy where I worked. Taking the highway at this hour always felt a little dangerous. There were no lights out here, just the black stretch of asphalt winding endlessly forward, and usually there were no other cars either. It was like the world was empty, except for me and the hum of the engine vibrating under my hands. I'd learned to be careful, especially around here, because deer would wander onto the road out of nowhere, their dark shapes invisible until it was almost too late, their eyes flashing briefly in your headlights before the sickening thump. That's why I always drove slow, never pushing past 50, letting the darkness roll by at a pace that made me feel like I had some control. The road curved lazily to the left, my headlights sweeping across the empty blacktop. And then I saw them. Tiny, clear pinpricks of light lined up in the distance, reflecting back at me. For a second, I thought they were eyes, a row of deer or something worse standing there in the dark. But as I got closer, I realized what it was, a row of traffic cones, the reflective tape catching the headlights and flaring in the darkness. Beside them, a blue light was flashing, pulsing weakly like a heartbeat in the emptiness, cold and unnatural against the black. In front of it, I could make out another glint of reflective material, the jagged strip on what looked like a safety vest moving slightly in the breeze. I felt confusion flooding in, my mind scrambling to piece together what the hell was going on out here at this hour, on a road that was always empty, always dead. What was this? Why was someone out here? The question spun around in my head so fast that it didn't even register that I should be slamming on the brakes until it was almost too late. My foot finally smashed down on the pedal, the tires screeching against the cold pavement, the seatbelt digging into my shoulder as the car jolted violently, headlights swinging wildly as I tried to keep control.
The reflective cones, the blue light, the safety vest, they all grew larger in front of me, swallowing the view, the world narrowing down to just those bright, cold reflections burning into my eyes as the car skidded, slowing just in time. The car came to a halting stop, jerking me forward as the hard screech of the tires finally died out, the sound echoing for a moment before being swallowed by the empty night. My hands were clenched around the wheel, breath caught in my throat, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my temples. That's when I saw him. The man in the reflective vest started walking toward my car, his arms out, waving slowly, palms pushing toward me in a silent command to stay put. The blue light flashed behind him, pulsing across his silhouette, throwing shadows across the empty road and making the reflective strips on his vest flare with each blink. As he got closer, I could see what looked like a police uniform under the vest, the dark fabric and the faint shine of a badge catching the light for a brief second. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, the road under his boots crunching faintly in the cold silence.
He came up to my window, lifting his hand and knocking on the glass with the joint of his pointer finger, each tap soft but somehow sharp in the quiet, like a clock ticking in a dead room. I took that as a sign to lower the window. My fingers fumbled for the switch and the glass slid down with a low mechanical hum, letting the cold night air pour into the car, sharp and biting against my skin. The window dropped, revealing the man's face more clearly now, illuminated in the glow from the dashboard and the distant blue light blinking behind him. He was black, about 6 feet tall, skinny, with a slight stubble shadowing his jawline and a small earring glinting in his left ear. He looked young, too young for the heavy darkness around us, maybe around 25 if I had to guess, his eyes holding a tiredness that didn't match the calmness of his movements. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost quiet, not carrying that sharp edge of command you'd expect from a police officer out here on a dark, empty highway. It was the kind of voice you had to lean in to catch, almost like he didn't want to wake something in the night.
"License and registration, please," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to mine before looking past me, scanning the empty road stretching into darkness behind the car. I paused for a second, the question catching in my throat before I finally managed to let it out. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I knew for a fact I wasn't speeding. I never did on this stretch of highway, not with the deer and the darkness pressing in from all sides. He paused, too, his eyes shifting slightly to the left, glancing at the darkness beyond the cones before flicking back to me. The movement was small, but it made something tighten in my chest. "Sir, this is a sobriety checkpoint," he said, in that same low, non-commanding voice that didn't match the situation, that didn't match the cold emptiness of the road or the blue light flashing behind him. I blinked, confusion tightening into unease. "Why would you need my ID and registration then if I haven't even been suspected of anything yet?" I asked, my hands still gripping the wheel, knuckles pale under the dashboard glow.
He leaned back from the window, his eyes unreadable in the darkness, and after a moment he told me to step out of the vehicle so we could begin the test. Something in the way he said it made the cold air feel sharper as I opened the door and stepped out. The wind cut against my skin, sending goosebumps down my arms as I closed the door behind me. Standing next to him, I realized how tall he really was, towering over me, his shadow stretching long under the flash of the blue light and the soft glow of my headlights. He reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a roll of tape, the movement slow and deliberate. Kneeling down, he pressed the edge of the tape to the ground, unrolling it across the cracked asphalt until it stretched about 15 feet ahead, the reflective lines catching in the faint light. "Step on the end of the tape and place your arms out to your sides," he told me, his voice calm, almost too calm. "Walk across it in a straight line."
I did as he said, lifting my arms out to my sides, stepping carefully onto the tape, and starting to walk. Each step measured, my shoes scraping softly against the cold ground. It was easy. I wasn't drunk, and I walked the length of the tape without a single stumble, the night pressing in on me with each step. But what made it unbearable was how close he was behind me, every step I took matched by his own, so close I could hear his steady breathing, feel the heat of him at my back, the hair on my neck prickling with each measured step I took. When I reached the end of the tape, I stopped, lowering my arms slowly as I turned to face him, the blue light flashing behind him, throwing quick, cold shadows across his face. It was only then that I really noticed it, the source of that blue light. It wasn't on top of a police cruiser. It wasn't even on a marked vehicle. It was sitting on top of an old beat-up sedan, its paint dull under the weak light, the metal pitted with rust, the shape unmistakably wrong for any police vehicle.
I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry as I looked back at him, forcing the words out. "Can I see your badge?" For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes empty, unblinking, the silence stretching out so long that it felt like the night itself was holding its breath. His face was blank, no flicker of annoyance, no explanation, nothing. That's when it started to sink in. And I mean really sink in, like a weight dropping inside my chest, pulling me down, making it hard to breathe. This guy wasn't a cop. He said something next, his voice slow, almost muttered under his breath,
the words mixing with the cold night air so I couldn't quite catch what he said at first. I stood there, frozen, watching him as he turned away, heading back toward his car. As he reached the door, he glanced over his shoulder, and it sounded like he said, "I'll go get it, 1 second." I stood there, my breath coming out in thin, fast clouds, as he bent over, reaching into his car for something. The blue light on top of his old sedan kept flashing, the cold, pulsing glow flickering across the cracked asphalt, catching in the lines of his reflective vest as he leaned deeper inside. And that was the moment.
While he was distracted, I turned and ran, my shoes pounding against the road as I sprinted back to my car, every step loud in the emptiness, my chest burning, the freezing air stabbing into my lungs. I could feel his eyes on me as I yanked the door open, sliding into the driver's seat, hands fumbling on the keys. The engine roared to life, the vibrations rattling up my arms as I grabbed the wheel, my eyes flicking up just in time to see him standing there, his face still blank, still empty, but his arm was raised now. And in his hand, there was a gun, the metal glinting cold under the blue light as he aimed it straight at me. I didn't even think. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the pavement as the car lunged forward, the seatbelt digging hard into my shoulder as I shot forward, the cones in front of me scattering under the headlights, some of them bouncing off the bumper and rolling into the darkness. I didn't look back. I kept the pedal pressed down, the speed climbing fast as the road whipped by under me, the car shaking as I hit 60, then 70, the lines on the road blurring into white streaks. In the rearview mirror, I saw the headlights of his car flare to life, bouncing as he pulled out onto the road, but I was already gone, the distance between us stretching out with every second. There was no way he was going to catch me. I took the next exit, the car swerving slightly as I slowed just enough to make the turn, the tires humming against the curve as I shot off the highway. As soon as I saw the warm yellow glow of streetlights, I flicked off my headlights, letting the darkness swallow me as I rolled down quieter streets, trying to draw as little attention as possible. My hands were still shaking on the wheel as I finished the drive to my house, the engine ticking softly when I finally pulled into my driveway, the world around me painfully quiet compared to the pounding in my ears. I only wish I'd had a dash cam that night, something to prove it had happened, something to show the world that it was real. Because I swear, if I had gotten it on video, it would have wound up on the news.
I was taking a drive from Maine to Upper New York to spend the week with family. I had left right after work, around 5:30, figuring I'd get there late, but I didn't expect it to be past 1 in the morning before I'd even be close. I had the top off my Jeep Wrangler to enjoy the warm night air, letting the hot breeze whip around me as I drove through the dark stretches of highway. I was somewhere deep in Vermont, well past midnight, the roads empty, just me and the steady hum of the tires rolling under the stars. That's when the gas light flicked on, the warning beep echoing sharply in the quiet, cutting through the music I had playing low on the speakers. My stomach tightened. The gas gauge in the Jeep had been broken for a while, so there was no way to tell how much gas I actually had left. My brother had driven the car the day before, and he'd told me he'd filled it up to the top. But clearly he was either mistaken or lying, because there was no way I had burned through a full tank already.
I tried to keep calm, scanning the roadside for any sign of a gas station, the darkness pressing in close on either side of the narrow highway. Then, one of those blue service signs flashed past, the reflective symbols lighting up briefly in my headlights. I caught a glimpse of the gas station symbol in one of the boxes, and without thinking twice, I took the next exit, turning onto a narrow, desolate road that wound away into the darkness, hoping it would lead to some sign of civilization. But I wouldn't be finding out anytime soon. The Jeep started jittering, the engine coughing and making a low, choking noise that sent a chill down my spine. The car bumped forward a few more feet, the steering wheel shaking under my hands, before the acceleration cut out completely, leaving me coasting helplessly as the Jeep rolled to a stop in the middle of the dark, empty road. I sat there for a second, gripping the wheel, the silence heavy, the engine dead. I couldn't believe it. But somehow I had actually run out of gas, stranded here, in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night.
With a sigh, I popped the door open and climbed out into the warm, humid air, pulling my phone from my pocket and calling AAA. I told them exactly where I was, giving them the nearest mile marker, the exit I had taken, the empty road I was stuck on. The dispatcher told me they could have a guy out to me in at least 20 minutes. I was grateful, but at the same time, I couldn't help the frustration bubbling up inside me. I was going to be sitting here, alone on this dark road, for at least 20 minutes, with nothing but the sound of insects and the distant rustle of trees in the warm breeze to keep me company. For about 15 minutes, I just sort of wandered around my car, pacing slowly, the gravel crunching under my shoes as I tried to kill time. I kept glancing down at my phone, texting a few friends about the situation, half joking about being stranded in the middle of nowhere and scrolling through social media to distract myself.
It was so quiet out there. No sounds of distant traffic, no passing cars, nothing but the soft chorus of crickets and other night creatures hidden in the dark woods around me, their songs rising and falling in the warm night air. The kind of quiet that made you realize just how alone you really were. Then I heard it. Something moving around in the woods. The footsteps were steady, not too fast, and decently heavy, the sound of leaves and twigs crunching under something's weight. I figured it was probably a deer, but this was bear country, and that thought sat heavy in the back of my mind as I listened. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself walking around to the passenger side of the car, closer to where the sounds were coming from, hoping I might catch a glimpse of a deer or some other harmless animal slipping through the trees under the glow of the moon. That's when I heard it. 2 sharp clapping sounds, cutting through the quiet, like someone was standing out there in the darkness, clapping their hands together. The sound was so out of place, so human, that it froze me in place for a second, my ears straining in the silence that followed.
I took a cautious step closer, trying to listen, my eyes searching the dark spaces between the trees. Then there it was again. 3 claps this time, each one distinct, echoing slightly in the stillness of the night. My heart was beating faster now, a cold edge slipping into the warm air around me. "Hello?" I called out into the woods, my voice sounding small as it disappeared into the dark, hoping, in some weird way, that someone would answer back, that it would just be a lost hiker or some prankster. But after I called out, the clapping stopped. I stood there for a while, waiting, listening, hoping for something, anything, to break the silence. But it was just quiet again, the crickets slowly returning to their songs as the seconds dragged on. Eventually, I turned and walked back to the car, sliding into the driver's seat, the door shutting with a soft thud that felt too loud in the empty night. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and just waited, checking the time, glancing at the empty road, trying to convince myself it was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, moving through the woods, each step getting closer, the crunch of leaves and twigs loud in the silence. I leaned forward, peering out the passenger side window, my breath caught in my chest as I tried to see through the darkness. Then they stopped, and that's when I saw it. A head peeking out from behind a tree just ahead, the pale shape barely visible in the shadows. It almost looked lifeless, the way it just stayed there, unmoving, half hidden, like it was part of the tree itself. But the eyes, God, the eyes just looked so empty, so hollow, staring out from the darkness. I couldn't even tell if they were looking directly at me or not. But they were there, watching. I was so focused on those details, on that pale, lifeless face peeking from behind the tree, that it didn't even register to scream. I should have screamed at the sheer horror of what I was seeing, but I was frozen, my mind and body locked in place as the night pressed in around me.
My hands moved on autopilot, cranking the windows up on both sides, the mechanical whine loud in the suffocating silence. I reached over and switched off the headlights, plunking everything into immediate, heavy darkness, so complete that I couldn't even see 2 inches in front of me. The darkness felt alive, closing in tight, wrapping around me as I sat there in the Jeep, every breath loud in my ears. But sitting there, hiding in the car, didn't make me feel any safer, not with the entire top off. The warm air of the night still drifted in, thick with the smells of earth and damp leaves, and every rustle, every insect chirp, every shifting shadow felt like it was moving closer. Without the headlights, I couldn't see anything, but the forest was alive around me, the night noises swallowing me up as I ducked down below the dashboard, curling in on myself as much as I could. I locked the doors, each click echoing in the small space, but it was a hollow comfort, considering how exposed I really was. The entire top of the Jeep was off, leaving me completely open to the darkness above and around me, the empty road, the silent trees, and whatever that thing was out there.
I prayed, really prayed, that I wouldn't hear any sudden sounds, no footsteps crunching closer, no twigs snapping, no brush of something against the metal of the car. But that sinking feeling in my stomach was already telling me it was too late. I heard it. The soft clink of someone grabbing the car door handle, the sound impossibly loud in the suffocating dark, the handle rattling just slightly as pressure was applied, testing it. I felt every muscle in my body lock up, my breath frozen in my throat as I pressed myself lower, trying not to move, trying not to even breathe loud enough to give myself away. My eyes were wide, staring at nothing, ears straining for the next sound. I was waiting for it, for the pounding on the glass, for the shaking of the doors, for a hand to reach around the open space behind the front door and just unlock it, letting whoever or whatever was out there climb inside. I was so exposed it wasn't even funny. And then I felt it. A hand, cold and aggressive, grabbed onto my back, clutching a fistful of my shirt and yanking just slightly, enough to let me feel every bit of the strength behind it. I lost it.
I screamed at the top of my lungs, the sound tearing out of me, echoing through the darkness, bouncing off the empty road and the silent trees. My heart was slamming so hard in my chest it hurt, my lungs burning as the scream ripped through me, raw and desperate. But then, just as suddenly as it had grabbed me, the hand let go, releasing its grip on my shirt. That was when I noticed it, the light spilling across the road, flooding the darkness, washing over the Jeep and the trees in bright, beautiful yellow beams. The low rumble of an engine pulling up the road was the best sound I had ever heard, the headlights cutting through the night as a truck came into view. A AAA truck. Whoever or whatever had grabbed me was already gone, swallowed back into the darkness of the woods, leaving nothing but the shaking in my limbs and the echo of my scream ringing in my ears. I scrambled out of the car, stumbling slightly as I ran toward the truck, my breath ragged, my hands trembling so hard I could barely keep them steady. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was big, probably in his 40s, with broad shoulders and a calm, steady presence that made the tension in my chest loosen just a little.
I basically fell apart right there, tears in my eyes as I tried to explain what had just happened, my words coming out in broken pieces, huge breaths tearing in and out of me between each sentence. I told him about the footsteps, the clapping, the head behind the tree, and the hand that had grabbed me, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. Something about him, about the way he stood there and listened, nodding calmly, his face steady under the glow of the truck's headlights, was comforting. His presence, his calmness, it was reassuring in a way that I desperately needed in that moment. He didn't say much, just gave me a firm nod, then went about his work, filling up the Jeep with gas while I stood there, still shaking, the night air cold on my skin as the engine ticked quietly.
When he was done, we exchanged a few final words, and then we both went our separate ways. Him driving off into the darkness, his taillights fading down the empty road, leaving me alone again under the vast, starless sky. Even now, something about that man's calm, quiet aura brings me comfort when I think back to that night. But the memory of what happened, the way that lifeless head had peered around the tree, the empty eyes, and the feeling of that hand grabbing me from the darkness, that's something that still haunts me. And I don't think it will ever leave.